Good Gebesh.
Kutyor, we are learning as Chos for Shlema Filan Chai Baserach and Shira Bas Shalamis. We're on Daf Zayin Omid Beis, I think. Chutz min Pesach veHachatas. Going back to our Mishnah, and the next couple of blot are going to be, at least the next blot or so, is going to be learning where weiter. We've been doing it for the last few blot. We're going to continue learning what's the source for the dinim that we said in the Mishnah. So now we're talking about, so the first part of the Mishnah said that if you do a carbon shaloi lishma, and we've explained that means both shaloi l'shem, we did a shini kodesh where he had in mind a different carbon than the one that he was actually doing, or shini bailam, he had a different mind, a different bailam. The din generally is that the carbon remains kosher, you continue doing the carbon, but the Mishnah said the exception to that is Pesach and Chatas. At Pesach and Chatas, it's not just like it's not just that the Bailam have to bring another one, but this one also becomes puzzle and it's going to have to be discarded. So where does this come from? Pesach minalim. Where do we see that Pesach is entirely it's la'akev? If you do it shaloi lishma, it's ma'akev the carbon altogether. The chsiv Shmar is Chodesh Aviv Asisa Pesach. The pasuk says you should watch the Chodesh Aviv, which is the month of Nisan, and make a Pesach. You call Asiyosav l'shem Pesach. Whatever you do for the carbon should be have in mind the Pesach, which is it has to be l'shma. Ashkan shini kodesh shini bailamino. So that tells you shini. So by the way, I should be clear. At this point, we're not yet up to seeing the la'akiv. We have to do everything in stages. First, we have to see. We said by the other karbanis that there's a mitzvah to do them l'shma, but they're kosher if you don't do them l'shma. Pesach is going to be possible if you do it shalom l'shma. But the first thing we have to do is find out where is the mitzvah to do it l'shma. So this is what we're talking about now. Shmar chodesh Aviv asisa Pesach. You call asiyosa l'shem Pesach. All the avodah should be done l'shem Pesach. Ashkan shini kodesh. So that's only talking about that you have to have in mind the proper carbon. Shini bailam minal. Where do you know that if he's meshana and if he's doesn't do the bailam lishma, if he has different bailam in mind, that's a mitzvah to have the proper bailam in mind. He should say it's a zeva pesach shehit zvicha l'shem pesach. That it should be l'shem pesach. No, that sounds like it's l'shini kodesh again. But since you already learned out shini kodesh from the first pasuk, the second pasuk is telling you shinu bailam. So ashkal mitzvah. So far all we've learned is that ideally one should bring his carbon pesach lishma. But we said pesach and chatas are different. That it's la'akev. That if it's not lishma, it's possible altogether. La'akev minolan. Amakrav is avachta pesach l'shem alikecha. Plus it says a third pasuk. You should make it l'shem alikecha. That it should be lishma. So that tells you from the repetition that it should be that it's ma'akev. Maskar of Safar Haizavachta Lahachi Hude also. Is that what the pasuk is available to tell us that Shaloi Lishma on Pesach is ma'akev? Hami Ba'alei Rav Nachman. We need it for Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman Amar Bavu. Aminayin L'Moise Pesach Shekar of Shlamim. This is going to be the next blot when we get to Daf Ches. But there's a din that if someone brings a carbon Pesach after Pesach, if he misses he misses his chance to bring the carbon Pesach, he separated an animal but he didn't bring it, it turns into a shlamim, which is a unique thing for a carbon Pesach. Other carbonis, if you miss their slot, you're out of luck. But this, it converts into a shlam. Where do we learn that from? Shenema v'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem aleikecha tzoynu bakar. It says you should bring your Pesach to Hashem tzoynu bakar. It says tzoynu bakar, you bring your Pesach of sheep and of oxen. But we all know that at Pesach, right? We know that they tied up a sheep to the bedpost. They didn't tie up a bull. That would be very destructive. There's no bulls in a carbon Pesach. So what is the pasuk talking about? It says, so it comes to tell you that something that's left over from the Pesach, that the Pesach can become, if it's left after Pesach, a carbon that's brought from both sheep. Tzayin doesn't mean necessarily sheep. It could also mean It could also mean goats in this context. But when a bakar, as well as oxen, shlomim, that tells you that it becomes a shlomim. So that pasuk that you wanted to use to tell you that shaloi l'shma by a carbon pesach is ma'akev is used to tell you a entirely different din. That a shaloi that if you are meiser pesach, if you leave over your pesach, it becomes a shlomim. Elam Rav Safra v'zavachta pesach l'krav Nachman. Ein echanami v'zavachta pesach teaches the din of Rav Nachman. Shmars chodesh aviv lemitzvah b'shini kodesh. V'matim zeva pesach b'shini bailam, like we said before. Lemitzvah. Who? But it said in that second pasuk, zvamartim zevach pesach hu. That's what did it say? Who? That it is la'akiv. Bein hacha v'hacha. That's coming to tell you it's la'akiv both on shini bailam and shini kodesh. Practical Gemara. That's where it says, "V'amartem zevach pesachu." You should make a shchita of a pesach. The Gemara says, so we only know the ikov by zvicha, by shechting, but we don't know for the other karbanos. We don't know for the other avodas. Right, so this is talking about legabi shini bailam, right? Because we have for shini kodesh, and we have hu to tell you that we compare it. So since it says vasisa legabi shini kodesh, kalasi yasser yia l'shem the carbon. So when we added on hu to tell you that it's ma'akev, that's going to be ma'akev on all of the avodas. But the question is, on shini bailam, how are you going to know the rest of the avodas? It only says who on related to zevach. So the Gemara hayel v'gali gali. The Gemara answers no. Since we said that there's going to be shini kodesh and shini bailam on once we said it by shini kodesh that it's going to apply to all other avodas, when we say who legabi, even though it says over there zevach, it also is megala on the rest of the shini bailam, on all the avodas, on kabbalah halacha and zrika, that shini bailam is also going to be ma'akev. Rav Ashi Amar Hayav gali gali loyamin. He's not masking this. You have to have a limud. Ella avodas minalan. So it says Zeis HaTorah. Where's this pasuk? We compare all the karbanos one to each other. Not all of them, as we're going to see, but all these karbanos that were listed. So we compare and miluim, which is brought by Chanukas Abayis and Shlomo. Betanya, b'yom tzuvesi es b'nei Yisrael. The pasuk continues the following pasuk, and it says, "On the day that I commanded b'nei Yisrael lahakav es karbaneim." It says other additional karbanos that also included in this hekesh. Zeh b'char u'maiser u'pesach, and we understand that b'yom tzuvesi is telling the karbanos that were not included in the first pasuk, referring to b'char, a carbon that you have to bring a bechar of an animal has to be brought as a carbon, and meiser, the 10th animal that's separated, has to be brought also as a carbon, and Pesach, the carbon Pesach. Hikisha kasav l'shlamim. So now we have a hagish to shlamim. Mashlam ben shini kodesh, ben shini bailam be'inan lemitzvah. I've called ben shini kodesh, ben shini bailam lemitzvah. So we are able to learn Pesach from shlamim that it's a mitzvah to bring it. Ukeshlamim. Mashlam ben zvicha ben sha'avoida lechalak them and lemitzvah. Pesach lechalak ben zvicha l'sha'avoidas la'akev. So Gemara is saying now that we don't need. We have the way Rashi explains it is those original psukim that we had used at the beginning to tell you the mitzvah of lishma by Pesach are now extra because we're able to learn out the din from shlamim of mitzvah of Pesach because it's part of this b'yom tzuvesi, this hekesh between b'yom tzuvesi and the other karbanos would include shlamim, and then now we have the two psukim that we had said that teach us Pesach, V'matam Zevach Pesach. I'm sorry. Then the psukim that we had extra, those are now available. We don't need them at all. What were the two psukim before? Shmar Chodesh Aviv and Shema V'matam Zevach Pesach. Those are telling us la'akev. So now we have, and once we learn it out from Shlomim, and we have la'akev, we say, just like Shlomim, it's the din, there's no difference between the avodah of Shchita and the other avodas. Even though now the akev is coming from pasuk that says B'dafka Zvicha, it's still going to be on all of them because we're learning out from Shlomim. Sak Gemara, Elahu Lamali. But now we have something left over, right? Before we had tried to say that we learn out the mitzvah of Pesach from these two psukim, and then who was to tell you la'akev. But now we're saying we're learning out that, but we had a problem with learning who la'akev because there only was one avodah. So now we said no, we learn it out from the other psukim la'akev. But now what is who telling you? Who is left over? Kedetanya. Now Pesach hu b'shchita la'akev. Aval asham le'nemar bahu el achar haktaris emurim. This is coming to explain the sheet of the man who's chaylik on our Mishnah. We said there was a Rebbe Eliezer says in our Mishnah that Asham is treated like a chatas, that it's going to be that it's loy alabayim shem chayv, and it's also pasul. It's a ganzen pasul, just like a chatas. Rabbi Shua disagreed. He said no, and he learned it out from this who, because it says who by Pesach who. That's to tell you it's la'akev. Aval Asham le'nemba hu el la'achar torah murim, but by Asham, it only says who after Haktas Emurim, who atzma shektur Emurav kasha, and the who by Asham is by a part that is not necessary for the carbon Haktas Emurim, which if you don't do Haktas Emurim, it's not ma'akev. That's coming to tell you that Asham, according to this man Amr, if you do it Shalei Lishma, it's not ma'akev. So we needed the who by Chatas to contrast with the who by Asham, that the who by Chatas, by Pesach, is by a part that is ma'akev. Yeah, but who by Pesach is by part that is ma'akev. I'll tell you that Pesach it is ma'akev as opposed to Asham, which it's not ma'akev.
What does the Haktaris Emurim have to do with this here? How does that?
But this is just the point is that it says by Asham who legabe Haktaris Emurim. Haktaris Emurim we know is not ma'akev, so that is megala to Rabbi Yeshua that since there's a who by both by Pesach and by Asham. And the who by Asham is on a part that doesn't need to be brought at all. So that's an indicator to us that the lishma, who means lishma, that the who of Asham is not ma'akev. Unlike Pesach, where the who is on a part, it says that the zvicha, the shchita, which certainly has to be lishma, and it's certainly ma'akev if you don't do shchita. So it's just brought there for the contrast. I know it's a very it's a tenuous limud. Like we're not really even needing the who by Pesach. It's just we're explaining that what the who is for, just to contrast with the who by Asham, which is what tells us that a Asham, according to this man the Amr, is not ma'akev if you don't do a lishma. And the way it shows that is because it's done by Haktaris, the who is on Haktaris Emurim, which is not ma'akev. We know from other sources that it's not ma'akev. Because that is Pesach. Now we're going to move on to Chatas, which is the second thing in the Mishnah that we say is possible if you do it Shalei Lishma. Chatas milan. Where do we see Chatas has to be Lishma? D'chsib v'shachat oisay l'chatas sheit shchita l'shem chatas. It says you should shechta l'chatas, that the shchita should be l'shem chatas. Ashchan shchita. So that tells you a mitzvah that the chatas has to be done Lishma. Kabbalah minalan. How do we know the other? The next avodah, the avodah of Kabbalah, D'chsev midam achatas. He takes the dam. Should take Kabbalah l'shem chatas. And like we said before, Kabbalah and halacha are always put together. We have a hekesh between the two of them. From the fact that the Torah said Kabbalah b'lashon halacha v'ekriva. V'ashkan shchita v'Kabbalah zrika minalan. What about zrika? The Amar Krav Chibar Alav Hakay Mechatosay. Take kapara l'shem chatas. It says v'Chibar Alav Hakay Mechatosay. So, and it says Mechatosay. So kapara is the zrika is what brings about the kapara. So that's a reference to zrika, and it says Travi l'shem chatas. So we see all the avodas, even though we left out halacha, but that's implicit in Kabbalah. All the halacha, all the kabbalah, all the avodas, there's a mitzvah to do them. The shalot with not to be mishana kodesh, not to have in mind a different carbon. Ashkan shini kodesh shini bailam minolam. What do we know? Shini bailam amakra olav. The pasuk says we keep our olav hakayin mechatosei on him. Olav aloy al chaveri. It has to be on him and not on a chaver. Ashkechon lemitzvah. So we found the mitzvah la'akav minol. And how do we know that if he's over and he does it shaloi lishma, the carbon is pasul? Kedam Rav Huna bar Yeshua chatas chatasai. Rav Huna bar Yeshua says in a different context, chatas chatasai hachanami chatas chatasai. Since the Torah says chatas chatasai when it could have said chatas, chatasai is an extra limud. So that tells you that it has to be l'shem bailam. I should clarify this. Is talking about the chatas nazir, the carbon that a nazir brings after his nazirus. He has to bring a nazir and other karbanos. Frak Gemara ashkan mitzvah b'shinu kodesh uzrika b'shinu bailim. Like we said, we're talking about the kapara. That's zrika. So all we see is by the chatas nazir that you have to, that it's said over there chatasai to indicate that it has the shini bailim is ma'akav, but that's only on zrika. Zrika b'shini bailim bein lemitzvah bein la'akav b'chol avodas b'shini kodesh or b'shar avodas b'shini bailim. We so far all we saw was just one. We just saw by shinui bailim with a zrika that's ma'akiv, but we don't know any of the avodas by shinui kodesh are ma'akiv, and we don't know the other avodas besides zrika by shinui bailim. B'shavas by shinui bailim bein l'mitzvah bein la'akav minolan. We don't even know that it's a mitzvah. Rav Yaina ashya mechatas nazir. We learn it now from chatas nazir. D'chsev v'hikra v'koyin l'fnei Hashem v'asach es chatasei v'eselasei. It says he should do his chatas and his oilish. You call es yosef l'shem chatas. They should do it l'shem chatas. So it says asiyosei that it should be for the shem of a chatas, meaning for the proper l'shma. So that answers the first part of the question. How do we know shini kodesh is ma'akav? Ashken shini kodesh, shini bailam, because that's extra. So it must be telling you la'akav. Shini bailam, and how are you going to know shini bailam? He says, we learn it out from chatas chatasai. When it says, from the fact that it added on chatasai, that tells you everything has to be l'shem the bailam. Yeah. Zok the Gemara, Maskav lo Ravina, Elameyato. If you're saying it's coming from chatas chatasai, oilasai, my derashtabe. If you're saying it comes from the chatas chatasai from chatas nazir, so what is it? It says it doesn't just say chatas. It doesn't just say chatasai. It says oilasai. So what are you going to darshan from the oilasai? So the Gemara asks back to Ravina. So you're saying oilasai is a problem. Ravina minchas minchasai nesach nischai my derashtabehu. Why'd you ask only from oilasai? You should have asked from minchas. It says minchasai and it says nischai. All those things you should say that they're coming to darshan something. He says, no, that's not it. I only asked from oilasai. I didn't ask from those things. From minchasai it comes to tell you that you could even bring it the following day, even that night and even that day. If you bring a carbon, you can bring the minchas and the nechasim that night and that day. So that's what you need, minchasai and nischasai, niskai. He says, but I still have a question. You're saying Yidarshan chatas chatasai, why don't you darshan oilos oilosai? V'su mi gamri me'adadi chatas chela mechatas nazir. V'su mi gamri me'adadi. How could you learn out from the din of chatas nazir? It could be that by chatas nazir it's ma'akiv because of its own chumras, but how does that tell you to other chatas? When we're saying a din that applies to all chatayis, a regular chatas chelev, or we're going to see other chatayis. There's many chatas that you bring. They're not all a chatas chatas nazir. Chatas chelim and chatas nazir loy gamra. You can't learn a chatas chelim and chatas nazir. Chen yeshim adam macherim. The nazir, in addition to bringing chatas, he also brings other karbanos. I think maybe an oila and a shlomim. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure if it's an asham or a shlomim. Chatas nazir and chatas chelim loy gamra. Shechen karas, and you can't learn a chatas nazir from chatas chelev the other way around, because the chatas chelev has karas. So you want to, you're not even going to be able to learn out. You're saying there's an extra Torah says chatas chatasi, an extra time by chatas nazir. But if you can't learn out chatas nazir from chatas chelev, so then you don't have an extra. You need the chatas chatasi to tell you the din of chatas nazir itself. That is a mitzvah. El amarava asher michatas mitzayr. Let's learn from chatas mitzayr. The chsiv asa koines hachatas. He does the chatas. You call us yoysa l'shem chatas. Ashman shini kodesh shini bailim minale. So that will tell you shini kodesh. How you can know shini bailim? Amarkav v'chipel amitar. Amitar zev v'loy amitar chaveroi. So we be able to learn out also shini bailim by chatas mitzayr. So the Gemara v'akatem yalfi mihadadi. How could you learn out? Even for now, you have chatas mitzayra. You still can't learn out from it. Chatas chelim chatas mitzayra yalfa. You can't learn a chatas chelim from chatas mitzayra. Shchen yeshim adam machem. Like the same problem we had with learning out from chatas nazir, you have from learning out from chatas mitzayra, that there are additional karbanos that are brought in addition to the chatas. Chatas mitzayra me chatas chelev legamra. And you can't learn a chatas mitzayra from chatas chelev the other way around. Shchen karas. The chatas chelev. If someone says, that's the standard chatas where he says, where he ate dam or he ate chelev b'shaygig. You can't. That's a chiv karas. Masha'enkin a mitzayra. Not only is there no karas, he didn't do anything wrong. A mitzayra is just he's mechoyev to bring this carbon. So where it says maybe you can learn out with a memotzin. Okay, we said we can't learn out any individual one from any other one, but maybe you can learn out a matzad. So you say you're not going. Let's learn not write it by chatas chelev, by the standard chatas, and learn it out from chatas mitzayra and chatas nazir malach shchen yeshimon dam macherim. Both of those have additional karbanos to them. Let's learn a chatas nazir. Teis mehana from chatas mitzayra and chatas chelev malach shchen hen sheila. A nazir, a person who was a mekabel on himself in the zirus, can ask a shaila and pater himself from the zirus. So let's say maybe we'll learn chatas mitzayra from the other two. A chatas mitzayra person, if he's poor, he can downgrade and bring oifus instead of an animal, which is not available by a chatas chelev or a chatas nazir. So therefore, you can't learn any one from the other two. So we have to find a different source that to learn out that you're going to be chayiv for a chatas. It's la'akev, and it's a mitzvah and la'akev and all the karbanos. We learned it from that hekesh that we said before. We had this before legabe Pesach, which is ultimately where we learned out the Pesach from. We're going to make the same hekesh. Akisha kasu l'shlomim. Ma shlomim bein shini kodesh bein shini bailam bein l'shma l'mitzvah. Avchatas bein shini kodesh bein shini bailam bein l'shma l'mitzvah. You need l'shma l'mitzvah. Hilchach mitzvahs mishlomim. V'hanach kroi, and these psukim that we have by each one of these different karbanos, that will tell you la'akov. So we'll still have the psukim, the individual psukim for chatas mitzayra, chatas nazir, and chatas chelev, and they'll tell you, since we can learn out the mitzvah from shlomim, the extra pasuk on each one is going to be ma'akev. Zok Gemara, v'ashken chatas chelev l'chsiv ba l'chatas. Chatas, and it doesn't just mean chatas chelev; it means all the karbanos, all the different chatois that we mentioned before. But there's still more chatois that we need to learn. Chatas d'avodas kechavim, the chatas of avodas kechavim, which we said you have to bring a soyer, a seir, I think. The shmiyas hakol b'tisosayim v'tumas mikdash ukdoshav, the three chatas of oila v'yared that we learned about in the beginning of Shavuos, the like sibuhu minalan, that it doesn't, they're not included in that parsha of shlamim. I mean, we have chatas, but they don't have their own psukim to tell you la'akev. How are we going to know that they're ma'akev? So I know chatas avodas chamashim chatas chaylev. Shechin karas kamaisa. You can learn how chatas avodas chavim from chatas chaylev because they both are chiyuv karas. V'hanach kuli asim b'me'atzad. And finally the ones of Oila v'Yored, you can learn b'me'atzad from all the other ones, from chatas nazir, chatas mitzayra, and chatas chaylev. Whatever kasha you're going to ask, you're going to say that it's by dalos. You have that by mitzayra. If you're going to say that there's no yeshna b'shela, so that's not a, and it also has the fact that it's karas is also not gonna. It's all gonna be b'mehatzad. Some of them are b'karas, but you can learn that from chatas chaylev. Tanar Rabban. So now we're getting back to what we had discussed before. We had mentioned before that there's such a concept that a carbon pesach after Pesach becomes a shlamim. Tarabban Pesach bizmanoi lishmoi kosher. If you bring a carbon Pesach during the proper time, meaning on erev Pesach, and you do it l'shem Pesach, it's kosher. That's not really a chiddush. That's a carbon Pesach. Shaloi lishmoi pasul. If he does it shaloi lishmoi in the proper time, then our Mishnah's din applies that it's going to be a pasul of carbon. You're going to have to dispose of it because a Pesach shaloi lishmoi is pasul. Ubishar yimais hashana. But the rest of the year, Lishmai is pasul. So Tosfos says, what does this mean? Lishmai pasul. So Tosfos, like on the toward the bottom, like 15 lines from the bottom. So Tosfos, Lishmai pasul. Hainu koydem Pesach. This is before Pesach. The boy Akira. That in order for it to become a shlamim, he has to stop it from being a Pesach. Or where the bailim were unable to bring it, except for they have to bring it on Pesach Sheni. But if it would be after Pesach, it wouldn't be possible. The Pesach b'shari ma'aseh is shlamim. As we said, a Pesach in the rest of the year becomes a shlamim. Shlamim l'shem Pesach kashachet. Is going to kedam a perak tamid nishchat. If you bring a shlamim l'shem Pesach, is kosher. Okay, but in any case, he understands Shaya is possible means before Pesach. It's still a carbon Pesach, and you haven't done anything to remove it to make it a shlamim. If you do it, but it's not able to be brought yet as a Pesach, so that's going to be possible.
Is it a carbon Pesach? How's it a carbon Pesach before this month?
I'm sorry.
How's it a carbon Pesach before Pesach?
That means after Pesach, it becomes automatically, it switches into a shlamim. So, right, the carbon Pesach has to be brought on erev Pesach. If you bring it at a different time, it's going to be pasul. But if you wait till after Pesach, it's not going to be pasul because it's no longer a Pesach. Now it became a shlamim. But until Pesach came, it's still a Pesach, right? You separate the Pesach. No one has done anything wrong unless he shechts it earlier, l'shem Pesach. But at that point, it's still a Pesach. It doesn't become a shlamim because he did something wrong. It only becomes shlamim when Pesach passes and he didn't bring it. But shaloi l'shmai, if he does it, we're going to see where. But b'shayim l'shmai is pasul. Shaloi l'shmai, it's going to be kosher, Pesach. We're going to see what that means, Shaloi L'Shmei kosher. So that's going to be l'chayra. If it's not bizmani, that this is going to mean l'chayra after Pesach when it becomes a shlamim. So Shaloi L'Shmei will be kosher. Zakdamar minani mili. Where do we see that a carbon Pesach that's brought for a different carbon, meaning after Pesach, when it becomes a shlamim, where do we see that it's kosher? So we're going to see the Gemara is going to. We already brought this from earlier. We brought this a couple of blot ago. We saw this from one Mand Amar. All the way at the end, we're going to see that this is there are three different sources for the same thing, and we're going to learn from each one of them. But this is the second place where we see this din that a Pesach becomes. We just happened to mention in passing earlier, I think from Rav Nachman, that makar from this. But this is the second source from this. Minani mili amar v'deshmul amakra v'minatzoin kabane lezevach shlam l'Hashem. if he brings the carbon minat sign, it should be a zevach shlom Hashem. Davar haba minat sign, something which comes from the sign. What is that? Yehel zevach shlomim. If something that's ba minat sign, which is a carbon pesach, should be a zevach shlom. So that tells you that after Pesach, a carbon pesach that's brought becomes a shlom. So tomorrow,
but then we already have a pasuk that has the son and boker that tell you that carbon pesach becomes shlom.
yeah, that's what I was just telling you. That's Rav Nachman. That's what they said. There's going to actually be and there's going to be a third one that says the same thing, and the Gemara is going to ask it like on the bottom of Daf Tes Amud Aleph, and they're going to give an explanation of why we need all three different limudim to tell you the same thing, that the Pesach becomes a shlam. But you're right, that's exactly right. So now we're saying a second source, Davar haba minat soin yehei lezevach shlamim. The carbon Pesach that comes from soin becomes a shlam. So Gemara aim a shlamim in midiachin eloi. Since it's mentioned in this pasuk, it says shlamim. Maybe it only if he has in mind that it should be a shlamim, is it going to be kosher? But maybe if he has in mind something else, it's going to be pasul. But if it becomes a shlamim, then it should be kosher for anything. Amar Vila, Amar Rav Yochanan lezevach l'rabbeis kol zevach. He says it says lezevach and shlamim. So learning it as two separate things. First, it says lezevach to tell you that it should be geshachten, and l'rabbeis kol zevach. So lezevach is coming, since it says instead of just saying shlamim, it says also lezevach. It should be a carbon. That's coming to tell you whatever he has in mind, it's going to be kosher.
So if he has in mind for it to be an aylo, still a shlomim?
It will still be kosher, just like every carbon shlamim. When you have in mind shaloi l'shmar remains
Right,
kosher.
but
It's
what
like
if
all
kosher
l'bayim
be-
l'shem
yeah, but-
chayva.
Oh, so it's a different kind of, when we say kosher, it means it would be kosher, but it wouldn't be aylo l'shem chavasa
Yeah,
of the shlomim. All right.
right. Just to me, right. It means, yeah, it's not going to be. I don't think I'm right, because we're trying to come to explain our Mishnah's din, this din that it becomes a shlam, but a shlamim that's brought l'shem something else, like you say, it's oyel ba'al shem chayva. Amar Rav Ilah, Amar Rav Yochanan lezevach rabbis kol zevach. So tomorrow ema kol deshachad lahavi kamay. So now that we have lezevach, which tells you any carbon, why do we say that it becomes a shlamim? Let's say that it's taka kosher and gansen, like you're suggesting, that if he has it in mind to become an oila, it becomes a full-fledged oila, a kosher oila, whichever carbon he has in mind. It could be a shlamim, an oila, or a chatas. I don't know. So tomorrow, ihav eksiv l'shlamim v'zevach kedekamer. If it had said l'shlamim and for a zevach, so I'm saying two separate things. It could be a shlamim or a zevach. It would mean either one. It could either be a shlamim or any other carbon. It becomes that carbon. Has d'chsiv l'zevach shlamim, which has a mashmoyis that a carbon of shlamim, although we're understanding zevach to be a separate word that teaches you something, but it also has an indication of explaining the shlam. So it's mashma l'chol d'shachad le'shlam mahavi. It's coming to tell you that whatever you shechted, it becomes a shlam. Zaktamara ema lezevach klal shlamim prat klalu prat em b'klal l'masher b'prat shlamim em midiachin aloi. Let's say that instead of darshaning, saying that it says zevach shlamim, and that's coming, everything becomes a shlamim. Maybe it means taka like we had suggested before, that it should just be only if he has in mind shlamim, it's going to be kosher, and nothing else. Say it says zevach, which is everything. We're going to see the Gemara is going to get back to what the klalu prat is. What the klal is going to be. It says zevach, and then it says shlamim, and then it says lashem. So that's a klalu prat to klal. But before we can get to he can explain himself what the klal prat is maskef of Yaakov min our pekoid. We had this question before. The first klal of zevach is not similar to the second klal of Hashem. It's only mar bezvachim, meaning animals that are brought as a carbon. Anything Hashem called Hashem. That would even include if he had in mind. He says, "I'm making this carbon pesach. I now want it to be a carbon oif." or I want it to be a mincha. Now, I'm not exactly sure. L'chayra, this should be the lav bar mina. It's a ridiculous statement. You can't make something that's a sign into a carbon oif. So I'm not sure how that even would work. But he's saying, but l'chayra, the klala basra is more inclusive than the klala kama. It's like the Gemara, and for the Gemara, hatan very bishmal, but klalu prati darish ki ay gavna. Klalu. So he says, no, that's not a problem. Even though the second klal is more inclusive than the first klal, it still remains a klalu pratu klal. Therefore, it should still be limited to the prat. Klalu pratu klal yet keina prat ma prat from furshu shaloi l'shmoi v'kosher av kolshu shaloi l'shmoi v'kosher. Yeah, prat mafash davar haba. So it should be anything that's shaloi l'shmoi should be kosher. So affecting Gemara. Imaprat mefurish davar haba b'nen the davar av kol haba b'den the davar elu shlamim chatas v'asham loy. Where it says no, what you're trying to say, you should make a klalu pratu klal. So that to include any shaloi l'shma, that it's going to be kosher, it's going to become a kosher shlamim. So the Gemara asks that it should be restricted to only what was mentioned in this prat, which is a shlamim. A shlamim is something that's ba b'nen davar, so it's only a oil shlamim that can be brought as a person can give it as a gift. But chatas v'asham, if he has them on chatas or asham, which are things that a person is required to do, those should not be included. So the Gemara says, so therefore it's not a klal upratu klal. We're going to learn it. It's not zevach shlamim lashem, but rather lezevach ribuyahu. Lezevach, the word zevach is a ribuy. When I first saw this, I thought it's saying instead of a klal upratu klal, it's a miyat ribuy or miyat. The Gemara doesn't seem to be saying that. It seems to be saying it's a straightforward ribuy. That it says lezevach, and that's coming to include that it's coming to say all kinds of the word zevach is extra, and it's coming to tell you any kind of carbon you have in mind becomes a shlam. So Gemara emel chol shachal lahavi kavase. Now that you're saying lezevach is a riboy, we have back to our original question. Let's say whatever he brings it as. Why do we say it becomes shlam? Let's say the riboy is telling you lezevach, whatever zevach he brings. Amar avavin doichin kachem and achal meitzel kachem and achalim. It makes more sense to make something kachem and achalim a pesach to become another carbon that's necha, which is a shlamim. I'm not going to make it into a chatas or an asham, which is not eaten. But aren't they eaten by the kehanim? They eat part of it. So we make a pesach into a shlamim because a pesach is eaten by anyone, and shlam is also eaten by anyone. Like a asham and chatas. He says a different svara will make kachem kalim to be kachem kalim pesach and shlamach kachem kalim. Ve'in doichin kachem kalim metzel kachem to be chatas and asham. Okay, we'll stop. I think we'll stop over here. We're gonna continue a little. We'll continue a little bit more about Pesach, and then we'll get back to other topics. Okay.
What time tomorrow?